So welcome to In the Loop Technical Q&A with Braintrust. We're very excited to have you all. I'm Brian. I lead the worldwide go-to-market team, and I'm joined today by Ankur Goyal, founder and CEO of Braintrust. And we have a few folks with us as panelists and answering questions in the Q&A. Ornella leads our product marketing team, and Ryan is also with us on our go-to-market team if you want to set up some time after. But the idea here is just to do a little brief intro on Braintrust, and then we had a number of questions that were sent in during the registration that we'll get to, and we'll just do some open Q&A. So it's kind of casual, and we'll have some fun talking about Braintrust and evals at scale, and should be a good time. Okay, so just a quick intro to Braintrust, since I'm imagining you guys don't know everything about us. Let's start up here on the top right-hand side. We have just the best investors on the planet. So a thank you to Elad, Basecase, Andreessen, and Greylock. They've been an amazing partner to us as we've continued to scale Braintrust. And we have a number of folks on the right-hand side who are also invested in the AI space. And it is just fantastic to continue to work with them. We are supported by the best engineering team on the planet, and you can see some of the logos of where our team came from. And one of the reasons we've been growing so quickly is the logos on the left-hand side have helped us build a phenomenal product over the last 18 months. So we've had the opportunity to partner with companies like Instacart, Airtable, Vercel, Ramp, Zapier, Notion, Gong, Loom, and Stripe. And it has been our pleasure to work with them. So if you're joining from those companies today, thank you for the partnership. It has been awesome to work with all of you, and we're excited to continue this into the future. A little bit about the leadership team. Ankur has been building in the AI space for the last 10 plus years. It's been great to partner with him over the last 7 weeks since I started at Braintrust. And what's super exciting to me is that Braintrust started as an internal tool. So an internal tool at Impera. And then once they were acquired into Figma to lead their AI team, they built Braintrust again. And over the last 18 months, I've been building this product now as a commercial company in the evals and LLM observability space. So it was a product that was built out of necessity. And hopefully those that have been using it have been getting some awesome value out of it. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about kind of like what we're seeing with traditional LLM integration, and then how it kind of differs with Braintrust, and then we'll get into some of the Q&A and questions. And Ankur, I will let you talk a little bit about this to start.
Amazing. Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Really excited to see, I just snooped the attendees, excited to see some familiar faces and also some new folks. So looking forward to the live part of this as well. This diagram it's kind of the classic way that people start with building AI. I certainly did this, and honestly, sometimes when I start new projects, I do it and have to remind myself it's not the best workflow. But essentially what you do is you pick a model, and then you write some code to use the model, and then you send it to some users. So maybe, when we're building an app, I send it to Brian. I say, hey, what do you think? He says, I really didn't like the response on this question. And then I just keep trying and iterating, and then I keep sending it back to Brian. And the problem is that, one, this is a pretty slow process. Every time I make a change, I need to wait for Brian or my users, whoever it is, to give me feedback. The second is that there's a lot of engineering overhead. We're getting interrupted constantly by getting feedback from users and then having to try to incorporate it. And the last is, of course, that it's quite costly to experiment this way. And by that, I mean like experiment in production directly. At Braintrust, we think that evals are a really powerful way to really improve how you iterate. And I think we've seen that with a number of our customers now. But essentially, what evals allow you to do is add both offline testing and online testing into this process. And I think that while both are really important, I can't overemphasize enough how important offline evals are. And to double click on what that is, offline evals are a way for you to take that loop that we just talked about, sending something to Brian, getting his feedback, and iterating, but actually capturing it in a data set and a task which you can run over and over again, and scoring functions, so that as you get more feedback, you can continue testing with it. And every time you make a change or want to try out a new model or try out a new prompt, you can test it on the evals that you build up before you actually release it. And I think, evals essentially solve those three problems. They're significantly less expensive than trying everything out in production. They allow you to move much faster because you can run an eval, on your computer or in your browser and get results in a minute or two, and then keep iterating. And ultimately, you end up with a much better product.
Cool. Thanks, Ankur. So I think we wanted to try this out. You never know how this is going to go in a live webinar, but I think the first question we were getting from our users was, is Braintrust working on playgrounds for chain prompts and logic? So let's see if this GIF works. So a little bit about what we're building, and then I'll kind of let you describe it.
Yeah, so traditionally, our playground has been a tool that lets you test one prompt at a time. But we're generalizing this into something that we call agents. And now you can actually do some pretty exciting stuff. So the first use case is stringing together multiple prompts, but we are in the process of adding support for loops and support for external tools, and chaining them together directly in this UI, and other kinds of control flow and code. So we're really excited about this. People are already using it to basically run their multi-step workflows directly in our playground and test them. And by the way, this feature is available today. So if you're a user of Braintrust, you can just go to the playground and start using it right away.
Ankur, how do you see this evolving over time? What do you think comes next?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm personally really excited about is making it easy to visually do scoring inside of an agent. So, for example, if you're building an agent that calls out to a vector database or something else to get some documents, it's a little bit tricky if you're building that in code to actually score how the vector database is doing for retrieval while you're doing the overall task. And I think we can build a really great experience in our UI that lets you, like right here, for example, draw a line from one of those intermediate nodes to a scorer and work on that scorer directly. And so I think it's just going to be a really powerful way to basically do more advanced and more powerful evals, especially as people's tasks become more agentic.
Hey, one thing that's been great about Braintrust is just the way the UI works together, but then also working within the SDK or calling things from APIs. I think some folks are asking, will this type of feature be available through the API? What's your thought about this as code?
It's already available through the API. So you can create agents through the API. You can invoke them through the API. And we're working on a really nice agent builder SDK that will allow you to basically hook up prompts in your code in a very ergonomic way to produce these kinds of agents. For those that are already familiar with Braintrust, we have a really cool feature called Braintrust Push and Braintrust Pull that allows you to basically synchronize prompts from your code base into Braintrust, work with them in the UI, and then pull them back to your code base. And we're extending that paradigm to include agents.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Let me head over to the next slide. So one thing we want to do is just pull out some use cases from some of our customers. And so Zapier has been one of our longest standing customers, and they're like such an awesome group of people to work with. We wanted to give some folks some insight into some creative ways that teams are using evals and Braintrust. And so this is an example of, implementing user feedback specifically into the product, and how they deal with changes. So maybe can you talk a little bit about how Zapier does this in production?
Yeah, I think what they've done a really impressive job of is extending the feedback loop all the way to their users. And I think that it's important for a few reasons. The first is that if you get really good user feedback, it allows you to prioritize which logs, which failed cases from your evals, et cetera, to really look at. And I think that in particular, what they've done a good job of is actually iterate on the user experience inside of their product to solicit feedback that ends up being useful. And I think you should think about feedback with the same type of experimental mindset that you think about evals. So if you just release a thumbs up or thumbs down button in your app, you're probably going to get a lot of junk. We've seen all kinds of stuff, but this, just a straight up thumbs up, thumbs down is rarely correlated with actual performance. But if you get really good at asking feedback at the right moments in the experience, you get good at asking for additional comments on the feedback, et cetera, you can actually turn it into a really valuable flywheel.
One question we've gotten a lot in the field is where should I start from a data set standpoint? Like how much is enough to get started with evals? And you had some really good advice from our customers last week in New York
Yeah, I
where,
think
yeah, go
um,
for it.
Yeah, I think it's actually way less important to assemble a good data set ahead of time, and it's much more important to establish a good feedback loop. So let's say that um, you have two alternatives. One is you're going to go in a cave for 3 months and very carefully curate and construct the perfect data set of 100,000 test cases to use for your great new app. Um, that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to say, hey, look, I'm just going to come up with 10 examples and let's start evaling on these 10 examples. And I'll make my app really good at these 10 examples. And then let's start getting some real feedback. And and then when users think that the app is bad, but my evals say that the app is good, we'll incorporate new test cases from production or maybe from internal testing, whatever it is, into that 10 and keep building it and building it over time. And by the way, we'll also kick out test cases over time as they become irrelevant. I'd way rather pick the latter than the former because I think evals are really an organizational workflow. They are a methodology that you can implement to uh, ultimately build extremely high quality AI applications. And I think to do that, you need to have a really, really good feedback loop and flywheel.
Cool. Thanks for that. All right, so this is one of our customers, and there's a blog post on this where they talk about like how they write scores and some of the ways that they do that. So I think, Ankur, the question for you is talk to the group about how to think about scoring. What are some things that, like if I'm new to writing an eval that I should think about as it relates to scores, and maybe share a little bit about our work with Loom.
Awesome. Yeah. Let me just answer Nico's question before jumping into that because it's on the previous topic. So the question was, have you all thought about an eventual anonymization layer feature that strips PII when automating sending user feedback in Braintrust? The answer is yes. We have a few ideas there, and we actually have some stuff in the works. But I think that because Braintrust is a platform which you use both to capture logs and to run evals, we can do some really cool stuff directly in the product. For example, one of the things we've explored that actually works pretty well is running online scores on real data, which may have PII in it, but you don't let people see it. And then when test cases are performing, when real logs perform poorly, using a model to actually strip the PII from them and make sure that they still perform poorly. And then if they do, give those to the engineering team to be able to use to do evals. And so, yeah, we're pretty excited. If that's a topic that you're interested in, please reach out to us because we're exploring some things there.
Let's see here. We had one more just come in. Yeah, cool. Thanks, Nico. From Igor. So is it possible to have access to tool outputs when building custom scores? We'd like to validate whether the LLM is producing the expected response with real data coming from tool executions or giving us a response that looks real but is built on top of hallucination.
Yeah, it's a great question. So maybe I'll talk about that if you don't mind flipping to the next slide as we talk about scoring generally, and then I'll touch on that specifically. So I think the most important thing I could say about scoring is that scoring is the main and I would say most important long-term engineering task that you can take on as an AI engineering group. And like a simple way to think about that is models change every few months. Actually, nowadays it's like every few weeks. Prompting techniques change. Tools change. Now there's MCP. There's all this stuff that's changing. But scoring functions that represent what good and bad looks like for your use case ideally allow you to embrace that change as it comes and use the consistency from the scoring functions themselves to evaluate whether the changes are helping or hurting your application. And so, models change all the time, but ideally your scoring functions have some longevity to them. And therefore, it's actually a really valuable and durable investment to make scores good. Now, the flip side to that is that scoring is not something that you just kind of conjure up and it works really well. We have a library called auto evals, which is built into Braintrust. It's available in the playground, SDK, etc. And we love it, and people love to get started with it. But we always tell our users and customers to start with auto evals and then customize what you do over time to better reflect your use case. And I think that Braintrust as a platform is a really nice place to do that. You can actually treat scorers experimentally the same way that you would treat the actual prompts or models that you're testing themselves. And we really encourage that. We also have some upcoming product features that hopefully will make that even easier. So to the question from Igor about how to look at tool calls, there's a couple things you can do. So one thing that we recommend doing is if you have something that is a multi-step process that involves calling a tool as well as producing some kind of final output, you can actually run scoring functions on the intermediate steps of the process and use that as a way to basically score the whole thing, and then Braintrust will automatically aggregate for you. So if you do like 3 or 4 retrieval calls, then the score for that trace will be the average of those retrieval calls, but you'll be able to see each of them independently. If you use our logging feature, you can actually use online scoring to do that without having to run the code yourself. So if you are running in production and you want to run scores on specific steps that involve tool calls, you can do that by configuring those scorers in our UI, and then they'll run asynchronously once you log the data, so you don't have to deal with that in your code. One of the things I was talking about earlier with agents, Brian, you were asking some of the exciting things we can do there. I actually think we can make that 10 times easier than what I just described using the new canvas for agents. And so we're pretty excited. I think, for example, if you draw out the initial prompt and then the tool call and then how the tool call is consumed as multiple steps in the agent, we can let you visually annotate it and say, hey, I want to actually run this scoring function at this step. And I think that that's going to be pretty expressive to do that kind of testing.
Cool. Awesome questions. Keep them coming from the group. And thanks, Ankur, for the description there. Let's see here. We did get one more question, so I'm gonna pop back here. So in terms of agents, Ankur, and multi-step prompts, will Braintrust provide support for branches and parallel prompts that run depending on tool call responses?
Yeah, the answer is yes. We actually already support that in the underlying execution engine for agents. And right now we're in the process of building a really nice UI that makes it easy to express that in the UI. So I can say with certainty, yes. That was one of the examples I typed out while we were building the API part of it. Albert has a really good question around evaluating multi-turn conversations. Well, first, would love to chat with you maybe afterwards about how we can make it feel more native in our APIs. But there's a few things that we do for multi-turn specifically, and some of these things are new features. But the first is in general, we recommend testing individual turns of a multi-turn conversation and actually creating your data sets so that you capture the turns that are most relevant or important. I think that one of the traps that we see people fall in is wanting to like simulate multi-turn conversations with LLMs. And I think while that is a cool idea on the surface, in practice, it tends to fall apart because what really makes multi-turn conversations interesting to evaluate is the um, uh, uh, the human responses that are maybe unexpected midway through the multi-turn chat. And so we think it's important just generally to capture the turns that are really important. We also have a guide on that, which someone can send you afterwards. The other thing which we just launched is native support for multi-turn chat in the playground. So if you have a data set that's built from multi-turn conversations, historically it was pretty hard to test that in the playground. Pretty common thing that people want to do is like change the system prompt and then rerun the multi-turn chat. But now under the advanced section, there's a switch you can turn on that basically says, please use this data set as multi-turn chats, and then it works directly there.
All right, cool. Did you see this scoring question, Ankur? Do you want to address that or hit that a little later?
Would be great to combine multiple inputs from different steps into a single scorer. That sounds like a feature request. Yeah, I think technically you can already do this, but yeah, would love to maybe follow up afterwards on what you have in mind, Dimitro.
Cool. All right. So I think we see this a lot where there's, this idea of automated scoring, but then there's human review and annotation. And Coursera is a company we've worked closely with to kind of like get this right and are continuing to iterate on it over time. I think, Ankur, can you give us your perspective on when to use automated scores, when you should use kind of like humans in the loop, and then also talk to us a little bit about the benefit of bringing folks in that maybe are a little less technical, like product managers, product engineers, folks that maybe aren't directly writing the code. I think these folks often make for building great AI. So give us your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, what we do in AI engineering in general is um, engineer the difference between what LLMs think about and how they communicate and how they process information and what we as people expect out of them. And so, without the human element of taste, looking at and iterating and sort of experimenting with the LLMs themselves, you're not going to end up with anything better than ChatGPT, which it's amazing, right? But it doesn't solve every problem. And so at its core, I think as a human, reviewing things, looking at data, experimenting is existentially important. Otherwise, you're just not building anything on top of the LLM. And then if you think one level higher, the question is, what is the point of automated scoring? And often when we talk to people, they jump to automated scoring being kind of like a benchmark. Like, I got an 85% on my report card. Now I got an 87%. That's great. But actually, I like to think of automated scoring as a way of saving time. So let's say that I'm working with a use case and I have like 5 test cases. There's not a ton of value to doing automated scoring because I can read the 5 outputs pretty quickly. I mean, maybe if you're doing like an essay generation or something, it's going to be too much work to read all 5 outputs. But in a lot of cases, it's pretty easy to read all 5. And that's probably fine. Uh, However, if I'm doing like 5,000, I probably don't want to manually look at 5,000 outputs. But I probably do want to look at some because I don't necessarily trust the taste or my scoring functions or whatever it is. I shouldn't fully trust that things work. And so when I'm doing a test on 5,000 things, the question isn't is my 5,000 row test an 85% or an 87%? It's how do I make the best use of my time and look at the 10 or 15 or 5 examples that are most likely interesting test cases for me to look at and understand how well the current iteration worked. And I think automated scoring is really about that. It's how do you find and identify the interesting cases and add nuance to the outputs themselves that make it easy to dig through the data a lot more efficiently. So once you embrace that, I think it sort of changes the perspective on human review. It goes from being a gating function or an alternative to automated scoring, and instead it becomes a complement. Uh, Most of our customers that are operating at scale don't human review everything. And most of them, or probably all of them, don't have infinite budget to just throw humans at reviewing things in the first place. And so the question becomes, for your use case, what is the sensitivity around the data and how much human review can you afford or do you want to do? And then as it scales, how do you use automated scoring as a way to ensure that those humans are making the best use of their time? And I'll give you a few examples of that. And Brian, you asked a great question about less technical users. But one thing that you can do is you can take a big eval, like let's say we're working in the medical space where there's a pretty wide diversity of people and skill sets. You can run a pretty big eval, use automated testing to find the 50 examples that didn't perform really well or got like questionable scores or maybe two scores disagreed. And then within Braintrust, you can jump in and have a human look at those examples and add additional context and audit both the score and the output. And then as a next step, you can use those results as is. So you can actually use the human scoring as a measurement or a benchmark, or you can use the human scores to help you improve the scorer itself. So often what we tell people is if the human scoring really disagrees with what the automated scoring said, you should pause on changing the models and changing the prompts and maybe run a few experiments on the scorers themselves until you get the automated scorers to resemble what you're seeing with the human scoring. The other thing that we've seen that's been really powerful is actually using the Braintrust playground as a way to let subject matter experts go one level deeper than just annotating things. We've seen pretty incredible results with subject matter experts going straight into our playground and actually annotating and iterating on the prompts themselves as they're scoring things. And I think that that's going to actually become increasingly a more powerful tool set. If you consider, for example, the medical space, medical professionals have really sharp and lucid insight into the terminology that you should use in the profession, certainly compared to software engineers that work in the field. And so actually getting them into not just the annotation, but the prompt engineering process itself is really powerful. And we're actually working on some features that will help us take that to the next level. I think our playground is a really great product right now, but we also think that we can make it at least 10 times easier from here for people to do that.
Awesome. Thanks, Ankur. We have a question from Mark, which is, have you seen customers successfully use LLMs to automate writing LLM judge grading guidances? If so, do you see the agents feature as a way to create this type of workflow?
That's a really good question. It's a sort of meta question. I think that in practice, what we see work really well here is using an LLM to bootstrap the grading criteria, like write the boilerplate of what a good prompt looks like for a particular scoring task, and then make it easy for a human expert, whether they're a prompt engineer or a subject matter expert, to iterate on that grading criteria until it really truly reflects what you're trying to test in the use case. I think if you sort of zoom out and think about it generally, if a model can sort of one-shot the correct grading guidance in the first place, then it's pretty likely, unless you're testing a very dumb model on the other side, that the model could actually solve the task to begin with. And yes, we actually have some plans for making that a first-class feature in the product. I'm happy to follow up with anyone who's interested on that because we're working on it right now, but we're pretty excited there.
Cool. Yeah, go for it.
Kincaid, oh, I have great news for you. We actually this weekend just shipped support for using multimodal data sets with our attachments feature or without them, whichever you choose directly in the playground. So now you can upload multimodal assets, image, audio, and video into data sets. You can use those in the playground. You can reference them in prompts. You can also upload assets directly into the playground UI. So in the file content type, there's now an upload button, and you can just upload something and test it in line. We're very excited about that. So if you're not already testing it, you please do, and let us know your feedback.
Hey, Ankur, this is kind of like spurring some thought. Maybe you could tell people a little bit how folks get started with auto evals, like some of our scoring that's out of the box, but then they end up writing their own, and what that journey looks like a little bit, just given that we're talking about scoring and some best practices.
Yeah, for sure. I think usually there are, I would say, like roughly three different types of scoring you should start with. And usually when you start scoring and you haven't written any scoring, you don't want to customize anything, your goal isn't to get the perfect score. It's to get some kind of score so that you as a prompt engineer can react to the score and then say, huh, this doesn't feel quite right. Let me iterate in the context of a particular example. And I think the three really popular scores that we see people use up front, it's going to be very boring. The first is Levenstein distance, which is just a simple way to compare strings. I love it because I know exactly what goes in and what comes out, and it's almost always not the right fit. But where Levenstein disagrees with my intuition, it gives me a really great jumping off point to write a better score. There's also something that I would say is like the LLM equivalent of Levenstein called factuality. It's now I would say famous prompt developed at OpenAI that compares an expert result to a generated result with some context about the input, and scores it on a scale of 5 criteria, and then generates a score. I think it's really great. It also teaches you a good best practice, which is to use classification on specific criteria rather than asking an LLM to generate a number between 0 and 1, which we've done a lot of experimentation with, and it just doesn't work very well. And then the third thing that I think is a pretty good starting place is a scorer called closed QA. This one doesn't require an expected or ground truth output. So what you do is you basically give it the original input, you give it the generate output, and you write up some criteria. So maybe you're working on like a summarization task, and you want to make sure that the summary is no more than 4 sentences, and it is written, in active voice or something. You can write that as the criteria and then have it test that right away. And I think those are three good places to start. If you use one of these scorers, then what you do is you run some evals, you look at the eval results that are surprising, and then you reconcile that with how the scorer is defined, and you're like, huh, these strings are very different. There's different characters, but they're saying the same thing. Maybe Levenstein is missing this nuance of my use case, and that is the right point at which you should iterate and start customizing it to do what you want.
Cool. Appreciate that. All right, let's keep cruising. There's a few different questions on here, and just I think we talk a lot about how to build great evals, and you obviously have a ton of experience with this. I think like we've talked a little bit about data sets, but I think one thing I've heard you say over the last few weeks is don't overthink it, just get started and start iterating. But I'd love to get your perspective on that. I think the other thing we've been hearing about from our customers is just integrating evals into CI, and the kind of like do's and don'ts there. How aggressive do I get in terms of like blocking things from moving into production, stuff like that. And I think talk to us a little bit about evaluating production outputs over time. What should we be looking for on the user feedback? How often should we be sending insights back from production into our offline evals? I think talk to us about the flywheel. So there's a lot in there, but I think there's some good topics for us here. And please send some more questions into the Q&A as it relates to these. We'd love to hit them.
Awesome. So I guess on the data set point, sometimes you have a great data set and sometimes you don't. And I think that either way, you shouldn't use the data set to bottleneck when you start running evals. I think, necessity is the mother of invention. And sometimes having a crappy data set with 2 or 3 examples that you wrote on a napkin, but starting to run evals will help you understand what kind of data you actually need in the data set to do the evals effectively. I actually ran into that recently on an internal Braintrust feature I was working on. I spent 2 or 3 hours the other weekend stressing about the data set that I need And then I calmed myself down and just started writing evals. And then it became obvious to me that the best way to capture the data for the data set was to use Braintrust myself and actually generate log stuff and then capture it into the data set. And so I think it's just really important to get started. And in particular, an eval, it just consists of three parts: a data set, a task, which is something that takes an input, generates an output, and then one or more scoring functions. And take whatever you have and just pen it down into an eval, whether it's in the playground or in your code, and start running it. And it'll become very clear to you where it's missing and what you could add to make it better.
Hey, Ankur, in the context of this topic, what about synthetic data? Where does this fit in evals? Does it fit at all from your perspective, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I would say that people jump to synthetic data sometimes as a way of avoiding the hard part, which is sourcing real data. So let's say you're working in the financial services space, and you're trying to create a new AI product to help you underwrite something or other, and you're worried about how it's hard to get real data for underwriting because of some regulation or sensitivity, whatever, blah blah blah. I think sometimes when you talk to people in this kind of context, they say, I'm just going to use synthetic data. And the reality is, if you use synthetic data, you're extremely unlikely to create anything that's better than just the model itself with no testing and very little prompting. It's actually better as a starting point to handwrite 5 examples from scratch. I know that sounds painful, but just create 5 examples from scratch and start evaling on that than it is to start with synthetic data. Now, over time, I think you can use synthetic data as a very strategic way to complement the gaps or multiply the influence of certain cases in your data set. And I think a good example of that is, let's say you discover an interesting test case from production, or maybe to Nico's point, maybe you have an interesting test case that has some PII in it, but you're worried about using the PII in your eval set. But you know exactly what the thing is that you're trying to test. Like maybe in the context of this underwriting thing, if someone lives in a particular state which has a certain law, then the model is getting tripped up on it. And you can't use the original example because you don't want to have the person's birth date or whatever in there, but you know that it has something to do with the legal structure of the state. Synthetic data is a really powerful way for you to fill in the gaps there, and then maybe come up with other ideas that you hadn't thought of.
Hey, before we get to this CI topic, I want to take a step back because I think building good evals potentially starts at the prompt and like prompt engineering. And you had talked this weekend on X about context engineering, which I think is a really important topic. And I'd love for you to kind of like fill the group in on some of your thoughts this weekend, what your perspective is there, and how to get great at prompt engineering, because that's part of what defines the output of an LLM.
Yeah, for sure. So for some context, the the challenge around building AI systems, I would say is really like threefold. One is using the right LLM technology and prompting it effectively, and I think that is an evergreen problem. Like I personally don't think that prompt engineering, or however you want to phrase that term, is going to go away. And in particular, I actually see the smart people at the labs like really encouraging people to spend time iterating on prompts and testing out specific prompts at specific points in their workflows to make them really, really good at the task that they're trying to accomplish. And then the second part of it is constructing LLM systems. So think of this as like the agent thing that we showed with the box diagram and the arrows, or using a framework to pull together pieces of an LLM. And I think that in 2023 and to some extent 2024, we kind of hit this inflection point where LLMs became powerful, but they weren't so powerful that you could avoid a lot of handwritten control flow logic and stuff. And so that style of complex workflow became really popular, and people started creating abstractions around LLMs. I actually think that is becoming less relevant, and That's why, among other reasons, our agent feature is really optimized around like pulling a few prompts together rather than creating like a very complex 5,000 node graph or something like that. And I think what's left is really the third problem, which is if you assume LLMs are really smart and you assume they have large context windows, then really the problem is, one, how do I prompt this thing effectively? And two, how do I actually engineer the user experience that I'm building so that it captures the context that the LLM needs to see? Because the LLM doesn't have direct eyeballs into what the user is doing. Or, if you use video, it sort of does, but generally it doesn't, right? And actually capturing that information when you're engineering a complex piece of software is really hard. One of the things I think that's really impressive about things like Cursor and Windsurf, if you use them, you sort of wonder like, how did the LLM know that I was just thinking about this? Well, they do a lot of interesting things. Like if you open another file, they know that you opened that file and they capture some of the context from that file and they bring it to the LLM so that when you're typing something in the original file, they actually, the LLM knows that you were just looking at some code in a different file, and it can use that to influence the completion that it makes. And so I think that's really context engineering. It's like assuming that LLMs are really smart. How do I engineer a really good system that brings the right information to LLMs? And I actually think that's going to be one of the interesting, long-standing problems of AI engineering.
Cool. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. All right. Looks like we got a question from Ray. Ankur, you want to chat about this?
Yes. Ray, I will be totally honest with you. Even though we support the RAGAS metrics in auto evals, we have consistently found very poor performance from customers who use them. And we also run an eval benchmark, and the RAGAS metrics consistently perform poorly. So we actually do not recommend that people use them. I think that there are some good ideas in RAGAS around how to frame the different parts of the LLM evaluation workflow. However, I think the implementation of RAGAS is it actually kind of fits that second thing I was talking about. It's just too complicated. Like each RAGAS metric has multiple steps, very specific prompts, often with a lot of small typos and errors that compound the types of problems they have. And so we recommend using much simpler metrics like factuality, and we've consistently seen better performance with those than the RAGAS metrics.
Cool. Let's see. We got one more. What's your recommendations on having LM include as a part of the response? Sorry, how they reason the results and incorporating that and how we use Braintrust for scoring and evals.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one, I think this is changing. So, in the world pre-reasoning models, there are really two places that reasoning showed up. The first is in chain of thought, and chain of thought can be a pretty useful accessory input as context, essentially, to a scorer for actually evaluating something. Although I would be careful about that because you don't want the scorer to be influenced by the intermediate work unless you specifically want to do something like test how long something took or how much reasoning it took. It's kind of like peeking under an abstraction. The second thing we've seen, which is extremely impactful, is actually capturing the reasoning that the scoring function does to help understand why it produced a certain score and then use that to actually help improve the score. That is something that's natively built into Braintrust, and I think it's one of the most popular features of the platform. I think that in the new world where Anthropic and Gemini's models actually reveal the reasoning that went into the final response, I don't have a concrete recommendation yet other than logging the reasoning and using it as a way to debug what the outputs are. But I think we'll probably develop a more refined perspective on that as some of our customers kind of expose us to how they're thinking about it. And really, we'll find out if it's any different from an eval perspective than chain of thought.
Cool. Can we talk a little bit about evals and CI? What are you seeing from our customer base and what would you like, how would you recommend customers get started, basically?
Yeah, I think evals in CI are very important. And the reason is that it forces you to take them the next level of seriously. And I think the way that evals often start is kind of as an ad hoc mechanism, either while you're iterating on and building something, or to do one-off assessments. Like, let's say a new model comes out, let me run our evals and see how the new model performs on our use case. But really, if you think about a mature AI system, every time someone makes a change, you should calculate what the correct things to reevaluate are and go in and reevaluate them. And Braintrust has some pretty nifty features along these lines. So for example, when you run evals in CI, if you use our GitHub action, we'll automatically use the Braintrust proxy to take the LLM calls, and that will automatically cache things. And so let's say you have a repo with like 100 different evals and you only change one prompt, you don't really want to rerun both for flakiness and cost and time all 100 evals. So caching kicks in and it actually sort of solves that for you. But yeah, I mean, I think most of our customers that are at the frontier of running evals and building AI applications are running them in CI. And I think it's an important thing to do. We also have a GitHub action that makes that a lot easier. But you can sort of construct it however makes the most sense for your own CI environment.
Awesome. Hey, last topic on this slide. So obviously, LLM observability is a big thing, and people need to understand what's actually going on in production with their users, right? But the shape of the data is different than normal observability data. We're seeing more data, not less, and it's aggressively increasing over time. And we've obviously been working with some of the largest customers on the planet in the LLM space. So talk to us first about Brainstor. Why did we build it? And then, it would be awesome to share a little bit about, how some of our customers like Notion, for example, have implemented Brainstor and then are just seeing things that they were never able to see before. And I think mostly because of like the speed and performance. But give us some of your perspective on that. It's pretty cool to see how far and fast this has come in a short amount of time.
Yeah, so we, like most other observability, related companies, started Braintrust by using the existing database technology that's out there. So we used Postgres and ClickHouse, and actually also DuckDB in the browser to solve a bunch of data processing problems and handle different shapes and types of data. And what's been really interesting is in AI, both evals and logging, everything has exploded in volume. So every span is getting bigger. In the world that you're from, Brian, previously at Grafana traditional observability, the average span is 900 bytes. We see the average span in our world is approaching 50 kilobytes now, and it's growing every month. There are more spans per trace, thousands sometimes. Traces are growing. We see 100 megabyte or larger traces. Some people want to log 100 megabyte spans. People are running evals with more data. So before the average eval was 100 or so test cases, now it's north of 1,000. One of our customers was pinging me the other day about running evals on hundreds of thousands of test cases every time. I think, models are getting faster, cheaper, larger context windows. So everything's just growing in every way possible. And then a lot of our customers are seeing incredible product market fit with their AI features. And so in addition to spans growing larger, there being more traces per span, we're also seeing just the overall request volume for many of our customers grow exponentially. And that is a really challenging data problem because databases, it just turns out, are not really great at dealing with really large volumes of text. And they're even worse if the large volumes of text have a little bit of semi-structure to them. So really large JSON is even harder than really large text. Now, at the same time, we work with some of the absolute best product companies in the world. So if you mentioned Notion, the folks at Notion, including Simon, who's one of their founders and probably one of the most active power users of Braintrust out there, they don't want Braintrust to be a tolerable or good enough user experience. They're very passionate about building really, really great products. And so our customers are, in parallel to this trend, also pushing us to build not just like an okay logging experience in Braintrust, but something that is truly like mind-blowingly good. And so if you take these two things and you combine them together, it becomes very clear that the database software that's out there, it just doesn't cut it for working with LLM-shaped data. And that's what led to us building Brainstor. Actually, one of our customers, Zapier, actually, Brian, who's the CTO there, sent me a screenshot of a search experience in Braintrust that runs in the browser. It lets you search within a trace. And he said, I want this search experience for all of our logs. And I sort of looked at that and was looking at data volume growth and all this other stuff. And it's just like, okay, we need to deconstruct this problem and build the right solution from first principles. And that's how Brainstor came about. Aside from being insanely fast, there's an instant search bar. You just type into it and results come without you having to hit enter even. It's also completely scalable. It runs directly on object storage. And it's also built for our customers to be able to self-host and to do that pretty easily. One of the challenges that we had with old school databases is that they store persistent state on disks, which makes sense and has a bunch of performance trade-offs and some benefits. But from a manageability standpoint, it's very hard, right? Because if you lose the disk, you lose data from the database itself. Brainstor doesn't store any data on disk. It caches some stuff locally, but if you lose a Brainstor instance, it's totally fine. The state is in Postgres, and like the metadata is in Postgres, and all the data is in object storage. That also means it's trivial to scale. So if you need more capacity, your workload is growing, you can just click a button and add more nodes to the cluster. So with all of these things in mind, we're very excited about it, and it's been an incredible success. Pretty much all of our large customers now have moved their entire logging workflow to Brainstor. And even at the scale of really large customers, they're able to just type stuff into the search bar and find logs that otherwise would take minutes or sometimes hours of careful querying to find instantly.
All right, we've got two questions. We got I think like one or two more slides, so we'll see what we can get through. So from Ankit, talk to us a little about voice AI native evals, Ankur.
I'm going to answer the second question first because it has to do with Brainstor, and then we'll just move off of Brainstor.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so on Tantivy, Tantivy is the inverted index that we use, and I think there's a couple benefits to it. The first is that it's just a really well implemented piece of code. It's easy to read the code. It's running in production at very high scale. The community around it is really good. It's gone through several iterations, and the inverted index is really fast. And so as a baseline piece of technology to build the inverted index on, it's great. The other nice thing about Tantivy is that even though it itself doesn't directly support object storage, the creators of Tantivy built a system called Quickwit, which we don't use, but we take some inspiration from. And Quickwit is designed to run on object storage. And so as a result, there's a lot of optimizations that have found their way into Tantivy that are well suited for object storage. And so both of those things made it an incredibly good fit for us to build Brainstor on top of. On the topic of voice evals, this is actually one of the more popular new flavors of evals that people are doing with Braintrust. I think in the context of your specific question, what type of evals exist? There's a few things that we see people do. I haven't gone deep into the interruption problem myself, so I don't have anything too smart to say there, unfortunately. But I do think that there's some really dumb things that you can do that are pretty effective. The first is it actually seems that different types of voice AI models with real-time constraints can perform poorly or better at basic transcription. And so one of the most common things that we see people do is actually just retranscribe voice AI workloads with slower and more expensive models for evals, and then compare the transcriptions using text or embedding similarity and assess how well a real-time voice agent did at transcribing what the user was asking. It sounds very dumb, but it's actually surprisingly effective. The other thing that we see that's pretty powerful, and it also helps a lot with debugging, is to translate voice conversations into text and then run traditional evals on the text. And again, that's a little bit boring, but it's useful because it lets you map voice into a traditional and I would say better understood problem space, and actually find a bunch of cases where whether it's because of the voice part itself or it's just a hard workload, the voice agent struggles.
All right, so let's see. We had a few more things prepared, but I think just wanted to give people a chance to get in touch with us. So feel free to scan the QR code if you want to chat with us more deeply. But just wanted to say thanks to everyone that spent an hour with us. I think the last question to close it out, Ankur, is a bit open-ended and something we can just think about. But I think over the next 5 years, where do you see evals going? Leave us with a little bit of your wisdom.
Yeah, I think, look, at some point, maybe we will achieve what people describe as AGI, although it's unclear what that means. And if that some point maybe thing happens, I think that there are a lot of things that we won't need to do anymore. But I actually think evals are probably the last thing we'll do. And the reason is evals are a way for us to solve the discrepancies between what AI systems think about and what we as humans expect. And that gives me a lot of peace, right? I think it's an important thing to do. And I think it's a very long-standing and durable task that we'll all be working on. And I actually think that over time we'll be doing more evaling and less coding, more evaling and less prompting, et cetera. Now, I think the nature of evals will change in a few different ways. One is when you take an eval result, right now it's a pretty manual process to make use of it. And I think, especially with Claude 3.5 and certainly with the models that have followed it, models are much better at taking quantitative information and then making discrete changes to code and prompts to perform better. Which you could think of this as sort of like optimization or discrete optimization using LLMs. And I think that's going to really change the nature of what it's like to do evals. I think it'll let us focus more on the eval problem and less on the iteration problem, for example. The other thing is I think the user experiences around evals will change quite a bit as more people outside of just prompt engineers and software engineers especially are doing evals. So I expect evals to be something that permeates from what you just do in Braintrust to actually what you solicit your users and stakeholders and subject matter experts to do increasingly. So right now it's a term that's really about software engineering or AI engineering, but I think 5 years from now, a lot more people are going to be thinking about evals, including non-engineers.
Awesome. Ankur, thanks for sharing some of your thoughts. Thanks to our customers and those who submitted questions ahead of time. We are super excited to engage with you. So yeah, shoot us a note if you want to connect. And until next time, have a great day. See you, folks.